Good afternoon. We are glad to welcome those who are watching us. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, journalists. We are in the press center of the Foreign Ministry at the briefing of the Ambassador at Large, Rodion Miroshnik. The briefing is on the crimes of the Kiev regime. After the introductory word by Mr. Miroshnik, you will have an opportunity to ask questions that interest you. Please adhere to the topic of the today meeting. We are live and there is interpreting into English, Spanish and French. Mr. Miroshnik, you have the floor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would make a brief report and describe a number of topics that are among my duties. This post was introduced by the decree of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation in order to collect and provide the data that will be the proof for further prosecution of the perpetrators, the head and the organizers of crimes committed by the Kiev regime and its patrons. My duties include interaction with law enforcement, investigative, military and other federal authorities in order to reach the purpose of punishment of the guilty among the Kiev regime. Taking into account the today date, I will tell some words about the events that took place 10 years ago. It's 10 years after Ukraine and the Ukrainian people ended the period of their peaceful existence. It created a background for unconstitutional removal from the presidential office of the elected president. The Maidan became a trigger that led the country to decades of bloodshed and degradation. The acting president was illegitimate, and he ordered gangs of radicals to kill the residents of Donbass that did not agree with the coup d'etat. Maidan allowed to announce and hold legitimate elections of the president of Ukraine, where the residents of the southeast did not participate. Maidan opened Pandora's box, and it was the humiliation of human dignity. Trashy illustrations, floggings in squares, prohibition of mother tongue, and desecration of graves, and this list can be continued. All the things that before the Maidan could not even be imagined by a civilized person just became the reality. Maidan launched the process of total degradation, and it was called the Revolution of Freedom and Dignity. However, it led Ukraine to a complete loss of freedom and dignity and colonial dependency, externally controlled military dictatorship. Today, I will dwell on specific events that should be understandable and known to the global community. The Minsk agreements and the resolution 2202 of the Security Council of the United Nations of 17th February 2015 were abandoned. We think that the Ukrainian side attempted by its might of 150,000 military group concentrated near the republics of Donbass to militarily defeat them. Back then, Kiev, in a violation of the agreements, attempted to the bloody purge of the insubordinate population of Donbass. The settlements and towns of the Luhansk and Donetsk republics were hit daily by the Ukrainian militants with up to 1,500 munitions. It was the preparation of the active phase of the army operation on the ground. We are convinced that if the republics were not recognized by Russia and the agreements on mutual assistance were not signed, the residents of the Donbass could face the plight of the victims we now observe in the Middle East, and also of the events during the Second World War, like the Volyn massacre, the Lviv Holocaust, when civilians were intimidated due to nationalistic ideas. These facts can on their basis, conclusions can be made with regard to observance of the principles of international humanitarian law. The shellings that are experienced by the civilians and civilian buildings in Russian regions are made consciously, purposefully, and with the total understanding of the bloody consequences of these actions. We can state the facts of the Ukrainian army hitting ambulances, medical staff, and the purpose is to deprive people of getting emergency medical assistance. The Kiev regime is consciously taking attempts to deprive tens of thousands of children and adolescents of education by forcing them into underground into basements. It was the wish of former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to drive the children of Donbass into basements. We have good reasons to assert that the Kiev regime aims by its strikes to create unbearable conditions for the civilian population by causing harm to the ecology. The data of the latest months confirm that the purposeful strikes on social institutions in the territory of the Russian Federation, time is chosen when there are more civilians there and the high-precision weapons are used. Explosive weapons are used with terrorist methods. They use long-range weapons, cluster munitions to strike civilian sites, and have repeated shellings when rescuers and medical workers are hit that have come for aid to the victims. We also note the use of drones. They are hunting civilians and civilian transport. We observe who they hit and how. It is based on the data we are now ready to quote as proof. For the latest weeks, I have traveled myself to all the administrative territories of Donbass, near the line of contact where there are hostilities and bombardments by the armed forces of the Kiev regime. I can note that a large share of the medical institutions is shelled now. The Red Cross often becomes a target and is not perceived as an object under the international protection. According to JCCC of the Donetsk People's Republic, 185 medical institutions were shelled from the start of escalation on the 17th of February 2022. On the 18th of December 2022, the vicinity of Donetsk, the Kalinin clinic was hit with 10 MLRS Grad 122mm caliber. The 6th Kalinin hospital building was hit, where the children and oncological departments are situated. Buildings 5, 7, and 8 were damaged. 2 people died, and tens of people were wounded. The hospital in the town of Tekmak of Zaporozhye region was hit on the 3rd of January 2023. The pediatric department was damaged. The windows were hit, and there were newborn children there. In January 2023, in the town of Novoaidar, in the LPR, the medical institution was hit with the MLRS HIMARS. It was destroyed almost to the ground, and the result is 10 people killed and 24 wounded. Most of them are doctors, nurses, and patients. A month ago, on the 12th of October 2023, a hospital was attacked in the Kiev district of Donetsk. The nurse died who was on duty, and a civilian. One patient was severely wounded. In the town of Oloshki, in the Kherson region, the local hospital came under heavy fire. The building of the hospital was damaged, and the ambulance park was destroyed almost completely. When Oloshki is subject to the shellings by Ukrainian armed forces, there is no opportunity for civilians to receive emergency medical assistance. They should have no chance, according to the Kiev punishes, any chance of saving or receiving aid. Only in the DPR, from the time of escalation of the conflict in February 2022, more than 630 educational institutions were damaged or destroyed. Many children have been transferred to distant education. And according to the Parliamentary Commission on Investigation of the Crimes of the Kiev regime, more than 130 children now along the line of contact suffer from hostilities. And the Kiev regime is trying to aggravate this situation by shelling schools, universities, lyceums, and kindergartens. In December 2022, the Technical Institute in the town of Elchevsk was killed by MLRS HIMARS. 7 people died and 27 were wounded. On the 26th of July 2023, the school in Lysychansk was almost completely destroyed. They were hit by cluster munitions. And this school was the point for refugees. At that time, only 3 people were in the buildings, a watchman, a disabled person without a leg, and a pensioner. They managed to escape. However, the building was nearly completely destroyed by fire. The Kiev regime is using another tactics, striking technogenically hazardous and radiation hazardous sites. They try to use the technogenical danger in order to aggravate the situation. The consequences of the destruction of such sites can be catastrophic, both for local residents and for the ecology of the entire regions. A vivid example is the explosion at the hydroelectric power station in Kakhovka. Our diplomats in the UN Security Council demanded to prevent the impending disaster back in November 2022. And the Ukrainian army on the 6th of June 2023 attacked with non-rocket artillery. There was an overflow of the reservoir, which led to a wide-scale humanitarian and ecological catastrophe. The victims were more than 200 people. 55 residents died. Many houses were flooded. The losses amount to $500 billion rubles, creating a radiation catastrophe. A separate point, as They made attempts to strike three nuclear sites run by the Russian Federation. The Zaporozhye nuclear power plant was hit with the use of UAV. There are 70 and up to 150 UAV attacks a week in Zaporozhye and Energodar, and they violated the ceasefire regime during the IAEA experts rotation at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And on the 26th of October, the Kursk nuclear power plant was hit by the Ukrainian UAV. The IAEA was informed about this incident, radiation danger that can have transborder consequences. Another technogenic subversive act was conducted on the territories controlled by Kiev on the 5th of June 2023. An ammonium pipeline, Tolyatti-Odessa, was hit. And there were clouds of this poisonous substance, and many local residents suffered on the territories controlled by Ukraine. And there were attempts to blow up the Crimean Bridge, two attempts. On the 8th of October 2022, an explosion took place on the Crimean Bridge. An investigation by the Investigative Committee of Russia allows to make a conclusion that this terror attack was prepared by the Ukrainian secret services. On the 8th of October 2022, 5 people died, truck driver and truck and 3 passengers of the car that passed nearby. The explosion on the Crimean Bridge on the 17th of July 2023 caused some problems to the traffic. And as a result, a husband, wife died, and their daughter was wounded. Strikes are made with highly explosive weapons, with a high number of strike elements. Such bloody strikes have been made many times. One of the most bloody strikes was made at the Universitetskaya Street in the center of Donetsk, with the use of Tochka-U missile with cluster munitions, and it bears more than 50 sub-munitions that explode over the surface of the ground, spreading more than 15,000 of munitions and in 300 meters. More than 20 residential houses were damaged, and a kindergarten, a bank, and a cafe. We also remember what happened on the night on the 28th, 29th of July 2022, when the Ukrainian side attacked the prisoners of war, Ukrainian militants in Yelenovka in the Donetsk People's Republics. Around 200 people became victims of these cynical acts. 51 people died and 142 were wounded. The Ukrainian commanders, representatives of international organizations, knew about the location of the prisoners of war. However, it was attacked about the Kramatorsk provocation that the Ukrainian regime tried to blame Russia. You are well aware of that. On the 8th of April 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked a railway station in Kramatorsk, controlled by the Kiev regime.
The responsibility is on the Kiev regime, of course. This bloody staging was organized with the sole purpose of holding with Russian side responsible for it. When everything was revealed and the perpetrator of the crime became absolutely clear, the Kiev regime didn't bear any international responsibility for this bloodshed. Just as they were not held responsible for the missile strike on Konstantinivka, where Ukrainian civilians were killed as a result of Ukrainian provocation, just to create an impressive background for arrival of Kiev of the head of the United States Department of State. I'm sure that the families of the victims and citizens of Ukraine who suffered from those provocations should know exactly why and at what hands and dirty intentions they or their loved ones suffered. Deliberate missile and artillery strikes on residential neighborhoods and public transportation are already a hallmark of the Kiev regime. I will cite just few cases where Ukrainian militants were specifically and deliberately used heavy explosive weapons to hit residential areas and civilian public transportation. For example, as a result of shelling of the town of Svatova in the LNR using the .U tactical missile system, 3 people were killed and 20 people were wounded. 13 houses, a city council building and catering establishment and transformer substation were damaged. On May 13th, nationalists shelled the town of Stakhanov in Lugansk. The shelling was conducted with the use of BM-27 Uragan. As a result of a barbaric act, 2 pregnant women were killed, 24 people were wounded, including 8 children. On May 31, 5 shells from Grad multiple launch rocket system were fired at the city of Makeyevka in Donetsk Republic. The shelling killed a woman and a 5-year-old girl. On April 28th, the Ukrainian forces struck a route cap on the center of Donetsk. As you can see on the photo, the minibus was burned to the ground. As a result, 7 people were killed, including 1 kid. On May 30th, HIMARS rockets manufactured in the United States shelled the Karpaty settlement in Lugansk. As a result, 5 people were killed and 19 others were wounded. The boiler house was destroyed, buildings and 13 units of factory transport were damaged. 69 units of transport of the enterprise Northern Nerudная Company were damaged, who are not similar to the military facilities. The events of recent weeks have only confirmed the trends we have already discussed. The problems of Kiev authorities on the front, they fail counter-offensive and significant human losses are pushing them to new crimes. Essentially, the number of strikes on civilian targets in Chaplinka, 9 people were killed and the civilian buildings were completely destroyed. Using high precise missiles, they struck civilian facilities 3 times in Donetsk. As a total, 60 persons suffered. Some of them died, including the driver of one of the city's oldest building, built more than 100 years ago, which survived the Great Patriotic War, suffered from the blows. A strike on the Mushketovo civilian railway station. Ukrainian militants hit a technologically dangerous object. Railroad fuel tanks used a repeated strike which affected rescuers and journalists. As a result of shelling, 2 people were killed and 15 were suffered. Another trend in recent weeks is the mass use of UAVs with the ammunition drops to hunt for civilians. In just 1 week, more than 10 civilians in Donetsk and Kursk regions suffered from such hunting. From the recorded date, long-range Storm Shadow missiles in their modifications and classmates were used for strikes on housing and social facilities, harm missiles and SCAMs and others, with cluster warheads. HIMARS, MLRS, and their modification produced by various states of the Western Rammstein conspiracy, shells of 155mm caliber drones assembled from Western components and using various explosive elements of warheads are massive used. All these elements to fit this nationalistic minority which applauding to the death of civilians people. If we look at these events, the number of hits against the civilian in our territory exceeds 200, 300 annually. The number of casualties among civilians exceeds a huge number. The use of highly precise social community centers and services where only civilians can come and civilians employees who work are increasingly being targeted with the precision rockets. The use of terrorist methods is becoming commonplace. We also see the regular hits, repeated strikes on the sites of shelling already carried out aimed at causing damage to rescuers, medics and communal workers. UAVs, guided drones used for dropping ammunition are now used for hunting and dropping explosive on civilians. All these facts will be considered by the international community. We investigate on all these cases in order to follow the prosecutors for these crimes. I would like to thank Rodion Valerievich for this intervention. Now let's move to the questions, and I would like to give the floor to the Russian journalist, Komsomolskaya Pravda first. Good morning. Your work is not limited to collecting facts and details of the Kiev regimes. And what would be the final result of your work? Thank you very much. At first, I would like to delineate the topic of my report. It is related to the collection of facts and related to the political facts. Prosecution of the perpetrators of the Kiev regime is related both on information and political tracks. Everything is collected in database, investigated by our prosecutors' offices, and now we have cited more than 100 court verdicts in Lugansk, Donetsk, People's Republics as regard to perpetrators who committed crimes against civilians. Then we continue these activities, but then we will finally move to organizing a specialized criminal investigations against the political leadership of Ukraine for terrorist activities and violating humanitarian law and those crimes which we are talking about now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to the foreign media, Open TV, Greece. Are you with us? Open TV. We can hear you. Good morning. I have the question related to the national minorities. We know that in the territory of Ukraine there are a lot of, at least many diasporas and national minorities from Ukraine, Romania and Greece. I just would like to know, have you ever recorded violations against these national minorities? The implementation of international norms and principles on human rights, of course, they are in the focus of our attention, and that deals with not only the Russian-speaking population living in the territory of Ukraine. Today we see the trends. Ukraine just adopted a number of laws which are in infringement on the interests of the Russian-speaking and national minorities. But yesterday's intervention of the Ukrainian vice premier, who declared that it is necessary to infringe upon the interests of the Russian-speaking or Russian population, and Vice Premier moved forward saying that it doesn't exist. So my question is, who are you going to infringe upon if it doesn't exist? So it smells like a Third Reich and the splitting of people in three categories. I'm talking about the legislators working in Ukraine. So three types. There are Ukrainians, representatives of national minorities who belong to the EU member states. Some tiny rights are existing for them, and there are other national minorities which are of no interest for them. So they are trying to amend their laws, trying to do this under the pretext of the total violation of the human rights of national minorities and move these standards in compliance with the EU standards. So they're trying to calm down these standards, like the prohibition for national minorities living in the Karpat region, in Azov region, which used to have the right to be taught in their ethnic languages, and they just said that, okay, use these slogans or just limited time for the advertising in the ethnic languages. So that's just a calming down without changing drastically the legislation. They continue the implementation of law on education, on reforming of Ukrainian language as a state language, on the secondary and higher education, and law on national minorities in Ukraine. All these laws contain norms which are of a discriminative nature for national minorities living in the territory of Ukraine before they were adopted. And Ukraine is ignoring the provision of its own constitution. So the major provisions of Ukrainizations contradicts to the Article 10, which guarantees the use of Russian language, and Article 22, which prohibits the limitations of the existing rights in new laws. And Article 25 also prohibits the discriminations for religious and other purposes. Everything is discriminated against, and nothing has been rectified, and I believe we can provide details in our next report, which would be presented in the near future. Let's come back to the Russian media, Международная жизнь. Hello, I just would like to know, how do you assess the action of Ukrainian forces when they deploy their units in hospitals, schools, and other civilian infrastructure? We have these facts, and the use of civilians as a shield against these strikes to protect their combatants. We've seen these facts during the liberation of Mariupol or Volnovakha, when civilians' facilities were used for military purposes, for the fire positions, and they hide the artillery and multiple launch systems under these buildings. We have a lot of facts of this situation. We have also plenty of facts we are working on, the number of hospital or medical facilities, especially in the basements, where the headquarters are located in these basements, warehouses, and other military units who deliberately hide in these medical facilities. So you have a hospital above, but in the basement you have the headquarters, military headquarters, with the storage of weapons and explosives. So they're using these civilian facilities as the shield against the strikes. Thank you very much. Telesur, Venezuela, please. Rodion Valerievich. I'm Oleg Yasinsky. I represent the Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, and Cuban channel Telesur. We have a question. It's well known that the crimes of the Ukrainian or Kiev regimes engage in the foreign mercenaries, some of them from Latin American countries. Does Russia make any steps to prevent the recruitment of these mercenaries from the Latin American countries, and who besides the Ukrainian embassies is engaged in the recruiting of these Latin American mercenaries? This is quite an extensive question which requires a lot of facts and details. I would just semi-open this. We understand very well that Ukraine, in violation of any international norms, uses its diplomatic facilities for recruitment of mercenaries in various parts of the world. They cooperate with recruitment companies and mercenaries who can provide or conclude contracts with these mercenaries. I will not specify these companies because this is subject of a specific report. The major violation which we see now is that the Ukrainian diplomatic establishments are fully engaged in these activities, which are not consistent with the diplomatic activities. It runs against this principle. But unfortunately, there are a number of states who turn a blind eye to the activities of this consulate and embassies, so they just ignoring or disregarding these facts. We raised this question at a number of international platforms, but it is supported by a number of leading Western countries. Voice of the Fatherland. Or probably the Star channel. Fedorchak, Star channel. Regarding those facts that you have collected regarding the violations and crimes of Kiev regimes, can you initiate some sort of incentives regarding the memories of the people, so that people would remember and assess what has been committed in the territory of Donbass and Lugansk? Not only Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but a whole number of other agencies are engaged in detailed consideration of creation of a network which would record all the crimes committed against civilians in violation of international humanitarian laws. This structure is highly required, which should operate along the line of contact. And in media, that's a good question. A whole number of projects which are now materialized in the form of booklets and books with the collection of the crimes of the Kiev regimes. And of course, now we are working on a whole number of media projects in cooperation with a number of media, which would use these data and facts which are concentrated and collected by us and by law enforcement authorities, which should be demonstrated both to population of Russia and peoples of other countries. It is needed in order to strengthen the understanding on what side you are, and for others we need to provide these facts so that they build their position on objective information and facts. This is my report as ambassador at large, and other reports and activities of MFA in other countries are doing for, and this project would be implemented at a larger scale.
Голос Отечества, please. Good afternoon. So, I have a question. If NATO is in war in Ukraine against Russia, maybe it will be more correct to name the NATO crimes, the crimes of the NATO regime in Ukraine, and to make the appropriate headings, because people seldom see the essence. They just see those headings, so they think that the Kiev regime is in war, that they hate the Kiev regime, they hate Ukrainians, and they disorient the society. Maybe make an amendment here. I think that these two things are quite compatible, because the crimes of the Kiev regime are the crimes of the Kiev regime. They make the crimes, they commit the crimes we have mentioned today. And NATO supplies of weapons are also a violation, because they supply prohibited weapons, and they assist in the international platforms by concealing and by legalizing the criminal activities of the Kiev regime. And every side will bear responsibility for the crimes it has committed. The Ukrainian regime is now exists as some subject that needs to get its solutions, its pretensions on what crimes they have committed. And the leaders of the Ukrainian regime should be prosecuted in the format after the victory in the special military operation. And for how long will we be able to counter NATO? And how do you see the victory of Russia in the battlefield? We can counter NATO for as long as we perform the tasks formulated by the president. Our task is to eliminate the threat from the territory of Ukraine. If there was no danger for the Russian people residing in those territories, it would not have started. So what could be the reasons for NATO withdrawal from Ukraine? Ukraine will stop to interest NATO for as long as it will be stopped to be used as a resource for hostilities. Now Ukraine has reached the peak when a lot has been spent on it, and it demonstrates its inefficiency. So after the costs seem to be unjustified, they will lose interest. And now Ukraine has no chances to exist independently. And after that, it will be an end to the Ukrainian regime. And the operation that is implemented now in Ukraine will be ended. So NATO state their main purpose is killing the Russians. But it will not end, because they have many weapons. Yes, the options of weapons and finances, it has borders. NATO is very pragmatic, also in Ukraine. Yes, maybe you have some opportunity to formulate the image of victory, because we have been many tasks, many times asked by our viewers with regard to the special military operation in Ukraine, that security with regard to Russia, Russian citizens, and eliminating the threats from the territory of Ukraine. The current regime in Ukraine is absolutely toxic. We do not see any options of coexistence with it. What the president has said, denazification of the territory to get rid of governance from outside, that is dangerous for the citizens of Russia. after this danger is eliminated, that will be the fulfillment of our purpose. Any other questions, colleagues, journalists? Yes, can I ask a question? Yes, please. Mr. Miroshnik, do you manage to find these specific Ukrainian criminals who just planned to hide, to get lost? Can you cite some examples? I think it's not exactly my scope, because we can see our secret services who catch spies and criminals who have tried to hide here, who were waiting for some time to fulfill some of their tasks. So we regularly receive such data about the activities of our special services, secret services, on the subversive acts on the territory of the Russian Federation. It's not exactly our scope. Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Miroshnik, please, a question from Reuters. Even two questions. The report presented by you today, do you plan to present it to a wider public, for example, within the UN, on the international platform, and to enumerate all the violations you have named today? And with regard to the tribunal, you plan to hold them responsible. What's the way to hold them responsible? So if it is necessary to present a report by me, I will do that. But it's the decision of the ministry, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now we work in close cooperation within the UN, the Security Council, who have similar information, make regular reports on similar topics. And for the latest several weeks, the issue of Ukraine has been raised several times. The strike I have mentioned at the Cheluskintsev Street, it was a special meeting within the organization, the United Nations organization. So we are ready to work on various platforms in various formats. The main issue is efficiency and truthful data on the crimes of the Kiev regime on the territory of Ukraine. The second question, so how will they be prosecuted? This work is conducted right now. The investigative committee conducts hundreds of cases for crimes on the territory of Ukraine, and in some time there will be court hearings by higher officials in Ukraine. And by the time the current regime in Ukraine is dismantled, these people will be prosecuted. I think yesterday it was the anniversary of the Nuremberg tribunal beginning. And with regard to special court hearings, it can be only after the end of hostilities and the real prosecution of the political leaders, the military criminals who are now free and commit crimes on the territory of Ukraine. So the final court hearings can be after the end of the special military operation, the victory over the Kiev regime. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, any more questions? If there are no more questions, let us finish the briefing of the Ambassador at Large of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rodion Miroshnik. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to all of you. Goodbye.